Ryan Wilson dropped his latest mock draft yesterday. Okay, CBS Sports NFL draft analyst. You can find Ryan at Ryan Wilson CBS on Twitter. And with that, the draft is coming up in Kansas City on the 27th, so not too far. We say hi to Ryan. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, guys. How are you guys doing?
Doing very well. So let's continue the argument we were having. My partner, Amal Shaw, values running backs. He brought up a great example of Bijan Robinson potentially fitting in nicely with a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, you got a 4 or 5 year window here. You're not generally going to pay a running back on that second after the rookie deal, but just let's start here, Ryan. I don't want to lead the witness. What do you think about drafting running backs in the first round?
Look, I think it depends, right? Are you taking Saquon Barkley number 2 overall? That's probably not the best use of money. But if you have the 2 first-round picks that the Eagles do at 10 and 30, I don't think Bijan's going to be there at 30. If you take him at 10, that feels sort of rich. Todd Gurley was drafted 10th. Thank God, back in 2010 now by the Rams. And was that a good pick? I think it was an okay pick. But the thing about Bijan, and you have to qualify this by saying you can find quality running backs throughout the draft, not nearly as productive in college as Bijan, but certainly good backs. Dameon Pierce is an example from last year, of course. But the thing with Bijan is he has a chance to be special. And in the right fit, Philadelphia feels like the right fit in that offense. We'll see what it looks like in a post-Shane Steichen world now that he's in Indianapolis. But with Jalen Hurts, they lost Miles Sanders. Yes, they have Kenneth Gainwell. Yes, they have Rashad Penny, but he's had injuries throughout his career. The offensive line is solid. We know about the wide receivers. It's just one more playmaking element on that offense where there aren't a ton of needs. Now, you could say they could go defensive line, edge rusher, cornerback there. But again, when you have a pick at 30 as well, that gives you some ability to have a little leeway in what you do at 10. Is 10 too rich for a running back in general? Yes. I wouldn't hate the idea of Bijan there, but typically you get your running backs probably on average pick 20 or later throughout the draft.
Patrick, I'm just going to take a minute to let that marinate for you for a second.
I've admitted I'm wrong on the Bijan argument. You both are right there with Bijan.
It's not even about being that. It's not that, because my 2 favorite players in this draft are Bijan and Will Anderson. I want to ask you about this one, Ryan. Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, there's been some flip-flop in terms of where they're going to go. To me, there's nothing really that's negative with Will Anderson. Jalen Carter, from your perspective of talent compared with off-the-field issues, if you're a team, is the risk worth the reward for you with Jalen Carter?
It's got to be the right fit, right? You can't go to an organization where they fire the coach every 2 years and fire the GM every 3 years, and that's a huge concern. I think that's in part why Seattle's been sort of a favorite destination for Jalen Carter, because GM John Snyder's not going anywhere. Pete Carroll's going to be there as long as he wants to be. And they have a history of taking in guys who may have off-field issues on some level in some degree, and typically getting the most out of those players. But if you're asking me who the best football player in this draft is, it's Jalen Carter. I mean, Jalen Carter played on that defense in 2021 at Georgia that had 5 guys get drafted in the first round. He was the best on that group. He was the best last year when he was locked in. They're the off-field things. They're obviously showing up at your pro day 9 pounds overweight and looking winded at the end of it. Those are concerns. But again, a lot of times people are willing to overlook some of that stuff when he does the sort of things he does on the field, and he's an absolute game changer. He is not getting past outside the top 10. And I know some teams were not happy that he said, listen, I will only visit teams in the top 10. And you can say that. And if you're picking, say, 14 and Jalen Carter's there at 14 and you refuse to visit you, guess what you're doing? You're drafting Jalen Carter. So is it worth it? Right fit, it has to be. Like, like I mentioned, the Seahawks, the Eagles would make sense. We know about the culture there. The Steelers won't have a chance to get him at 17, but that's an example of a coach who has had a history of getting the most out of his players no matter what their background.
Ryan Wilson, CBS Sports. He dropped his latest mock yesterday at Ryan Wilson CBS on Twitter. Joins us here on Sharp Money. So wide receivers, right before the show started, I saw the story about Quentin Johnson, Ryan, not being invited to the draft. Now, full disclosure, you have Quentin Johnson going, let's see, you have Smith and Jigba going 11 to Houston, and then you have Quentin Johnson going 22 to Baltimore, and Addison going 25. Were you surprised the wide receiver there out of TCU wasn't invited to the draft here?
No, but only because I have such anxiety that I don't want to see any of these kids go and then not get their name called the first night. So I'm like, good, just stay at home and celebrate with your family whenever it happens. But here's the other thing to keep in mind, and I didn't have Zay Flowers in this first round. There's a really good chance Zay Flowers goes in the first round, and I've talked to teams that are having the conversation as to whether Zay or Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be the first wide receiver. I think there's a chance that Quentin Johnson maybe last until the end of the first round or even goes early second. I love Quentin Johnson. I love everything about his game. He's one of the few big wide receivers. He can run. He makes plays at all three levels. He does occasionally have the focus drops, but I think in terms of high point, catch machine, big catch radius, all the phrases we hear, especially pairing him with a young quarterback or a quarterback who has zero weapons, that feels like an easy matchup. That said, teams are high on Jackson Smith-Njigba. He ran a 4.5 at his pro day, but his short area quickness, the three cone and the short shuttle were off the charts. The best of the combine, one of the best at all the pro days that we've seen over the last month. And then Zay Flowers was the offense at Boston College. He's smaller at 5'9", but he is absolutely electric, has return ability as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see one of those guys go first, and maybe Quentin Johnson, slips to the end of the first round, early second.
Ryan, how much does a university's pedigree and success for players doing well from either that particular position or just as a collective matter when teams look to draft a player?
Yeah, I'm sort of laughing because I've asked that question before to scouts, and usually the response I get is you grade the player, you don't grade the history or the school. But I would imagine they have to be conversations in draft rooms about that. Typically, it's been about Ohio State quarterbacks, right? And Justin Fields sort of broke that mold, and I think CJ is going to go take it a step further. We talk about Big Ten running backs not having great careers, and you can certainly argue about that. So I think at the end of the day, the teams try to grade the player irrespective of where they went to school or the history of that school. And it's tough to do because your biases come in, and I think that's a lot. One of the reasons that we're seeing a lot more analytics involved in the overall draft process. Analytics isn't the end-all, be-all. It's not the driving force, but it's one more component that teams use to figure out, is this player going to be successful in my system based on the data that we have on him? And that was data that wasn't previously available, forget 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. So I think that's sort of helping tweak that process.
Okay, Ryan, we waited. You have 4 minutes to rant about the quarterbacks. You've got the four: Young, Stroud, Richardson, and Levis. Here's what I want. Two-part. What do you think's going to happen with the four quarterbacks? And what would Ryan Wilson do with the four quarterbacks?
All right, let's go. So I think, from what I understand, is that the Panthers are in on C.J. Stroud. So the Bryce Young as the favorite is sort of interesting as first overall pick. I don't think it's going to happen unless there's a trade. So I think C.J. goes first. I think Bryce goes second. The only team that I heard that is interested in Will Levis at the top half of the draft are the Colts. They pick fourth. So it's going to be Will Levis or Anthony Richardson. For the second conversation, let's just say it's Will Levis. I would take Anthony Richardson. I'll address that in a second. And then Anthony Richardson probably goes in the top 10, maybe higher than that. I was at all four pro days for these quarterbacks. I've had to rank the pro days. Bryce just slightly ahead of CJ. Then Anthony Richardson on just sheer athleticism in person was something to behold. And then, of course, Will Levis had a good pro day, but there were some questions. He's a little too muscular upper body, felt a little stiff at times in terms of being able to let the ball go. Didn't throw with as much touch as the other three quarterbacks down the field, even though he had the best arm, better than Anthony Richardson's. What I would do, I would take Bryce first. I don't care that he's 5'10". He's the best quarterback in this draft class. If he were 6'1", we'd be talking about him. We talk about Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, those type of players. At 2, I'm taking C.J. Stroud, although I've heard that the Texans aren't going to draft C.J. if that's their only option at 2, if Bryce is gone, because they're so high on Bryce, which would be another interesting conversation and development in real time. But C.J. is my number 2 quarterback. Then it's Anthony Richardson, and then it's Will Levis. And I'll be honest with you guys, if Hendon Hooker were healthy, didn't have the ACL, I know he's 25 years old, I would be having a very serious conversation about whether I'm taking Hendon Hooker over Will Levis based on their body of work. Is Will Levis does he look like a quarterback built in the lab? Absolutely. But Hendon Hooker does a lot of things well respected by his teammates, has a good arm, is incredibly athletic. They run that weird offense at Tennessee, so that transition has to be taken into account. But I'm just not as high on Will Levis as some other folks in the media, and I know NFL teams are sort of concerned about him as a top 5 pick. I think that if the Colts don't take him, it'll be interesting to see where he ends up going and how far into the first round he might drop before his name's finally called.
I want to ask you.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. I'm going to let you go, but we both think Will Levis as a first rounder is a joke. We watched him. We don't think he's a first round quarterback. Amal Shaw, go ahead.
Well, I'd rather go direct snap to the running back, but that summarizes Will Levis for me.
Ouch.
Christian Gonzalez at Oregon. You got him rated very highly. This was one of the worst pass defenses in college football as a collective last year. Tell me the strengths of Christian Gonzalez.
He's 6'2", he's 190. I think both his parents are Division I basketball players. His sister's a track star, and he has ball skills more importantly. I'm not sure what he ran. I think he ran the 4.3s or 4.4s. But the athleticism is what pops off the screen at you, and he's more fluid than Joey Porter Jr., even though they're the same size. So I think that's the size. Again, we talk about the quarterback, the same thing. You see that size, you fall in love with it, but he has ball skills, and he's very fluid in his movements. Needs to get better in terms of run support, but that's something you can coach. You can't coach ball skills. And a name I'll throw at you quickly, Emmanuel Forbes at the bottom of the first round. There's a chance he goes. He's only 166, ran a 4.35, 14 career interceptions, 6 pick sixes. Teams love ball skills, like I said. So Forbes is a guy to look for as a sort of sneaky first rounder.
He was Mississippi State's best offense during the end of the year.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's what I do know. Ryan Wilson, I've been doing this a long time, that you have very much the best home setup and backdrop of any guest we've ever had on. That is a tremendous look you've got going on. So congratulations. And also check out the mock over at CBS Sports. NFL draft analyst Ryan Wilson. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you.
Hey, thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Okay, you too, buddy. Thank you very much.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.